Hi, everybody. Let's let these folks in, shall we? Hello, hello. How is everybody doing? Hello. SL, you told me your first name yesterday and I've forgotten what it is. Could you tell me again? Oh, you're on mute.
Salita.
Salita, thank you, thank you. How is everybody? I'm so sorry I'm a minute late. I had a moment where I couldn't find my laptop in my house. That's the honest answer. And that, of all things, I need before I start. Hi, Sunita. It's so good to see your face. How are you? I know you were here yesterday, but I couldn't see your face, so it's a nice treat to get to see it. Hello, Rachel. Hello, Kristen, Shavai, Jean. Oh my God, I'm so happy to have you all back. What a treat. How's everyone feeling? Yeah? Yeah, I'm gonna light some incense for us. That feels festive and fun. If you're watching the replay, also hello. You can message me and tell me how you're feeling. All right. So, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I went for a nice long walk just before we started today, and it had just stopped raining. Oh, and you know that post-rain walk? It's just the freshest feeling. So there's a question about the incense. I just got this weekend. It's called Black Moon Botanicals. And I was at a cute little music festival, and these women, this like local incense, I think they also might make soap at shop. And it was everything smelled so good. You know, sometimes with incense, like it's really 50-50. Like some of them smell good and some of them they all smelled amazing. So Black Moon Botanicals, I was actually thinking that I want to start gifting them to my one-on-one clients. So if that entices you, but go to their website. This one's called Meet Me in the Woods. And it smells like being in the woods, although it's already gone out because I was too impatient. Okay. Can you guys tell that I'm amped today? So here's where I wanted to start. I think all of you here who are here live, were here yesterday, as I'm curious to know, now that you had a moment to kind of incubate and integrate some of what we talked about, because we covered a lot of ground yesterday. We went a lot of places. I'm curious to know what has stood out to you the most, or what has kind of carried with you since we connected yesterday. You can put it in the chat, or you can come off mute and speak to it, whatever feels most supportive. Yeah, go ahead, my friend Jean.
Always there, waving my little hand. So our conversation yesterday about the board of directors and going kind of deeper into discussions of the victim. Oof. I actually yesterday, that was big, because that's even that archetype or that person all by itself, there's so much shame. Even looking at that person, even looking at them and seeing that they're there is just like, and they're already so complex and shame. So anyways, but all I wanted to say was that was really powerful, to the extent that like I had to go off camera for a while yesterday and put my head on the desk. But what I noticed too, and this does happen, and I think it's encouraging, although it was very hard, is that it was a physical, like that piece of information had to be processed physically. And I was still heavy and like weeping at midnight last night.
Oh.
Not, right? But that was, I mean, it's good, right? It was a hard fucking day, but that felt really, that was a place, that was somebody who really needed seeing. So I want to thank you and everybody for that, though, because I don't know what rabbit hole, you know what I mean? Like where we got so deep with that, but it was really great. Eventually it was great.
Yeah. I mean, I love everything you're speaking to. I mean, I hold with compassion that you were like undone, and also I can't help but feel like super jazzed, right? Because of course that's the evidence that like things that we're cracking open and things are moving. And I know you know this and you feel it, but like joy and relief is always on the other side of those moments of big somatic release or big emotional release. And I also find the more and more time goes by, that even as I might be in moments of like kind of deep feeling, more and more I also feel held and loved in them, right? And that the line between the grief and the love is increasingly blurring, which is its own really gorgeous experience. I say that, and also the other half the time I text my best friend and I'm like, why did we pick this kind of magic? I'm so unhappy right now. So 50-50. But and I also really love what you're speaking to about the somatic experience, right? Because one of the things about kind of subconscious work, which is what we touched into yesterday, is that it lives in our heart and our emotions and our bodies, right? And so it's not uncommon that the release or the processing or the integrating is a physical experience. And sometimes what's beautiful is that we don't even have to invite our mind, right? Sometimes you have these moments of grief or intense feeling, and we don't even have to actually explain them. We can just feel them, right? And then his own kind of release gets to happen in that. So thank you once again for bringing your gorgeous, the body says, I got this. Yes. And our body, and our body does again and again in a way that sometimes gets to give our brain a break. I mean, it's terrible at taking a break. I will, as an aside, give a plug for my my bestie and business partner who is doing a workshop, I think in 2 weeks, that's actually about this, specifically about somatics. So if anyone's curious about that, let me know, and I can send you the link to that, because she's truly masterful at this work. Anyone else want to share? So deep compassion and grieving and a little bit of ick about the victim. Rachel says to trust myself more. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. I love that space opening up. Anyone else want to speak to anything?
So quickly echoing Jean, but
Mhm.
how she felt like very hard and icky. I had the complete opposite. Like I was sitting at the dining table and I was like, oh my God, like it's play, it's fun. Like, who do I want to bring out right now? Do I want my perfectionism? Do I want this other, like the lag? Like, so I looked at it from this place of fun. Like, let's play with it rather than, feeling heavy. And it's just, I have 2 little kids, so I have to be very intentional about like what I bring to the table. But for me, exact same thing. Like that was such a good way to look at it. The board of directors of, all of that. But for me personally, it was like more fun and play with that aspect. So thank you.
I have tears in my eyes. I think truly that is one of your gifts, Sunita, is that I really, really want to like reflect that back to you. I think you have such a natural capacity to access joy in a way that the rest of us are like swimming upstream. And I really am perpetually grateful for the way that you just, I think, genuinely just carry a frequency of joy. And whenever we're with you, we get to like soak it, right? It's like standing in the sun on a like nice warm beach day with a good breeze. But I just want to reflect back to you that I think that is really genuinely a gift of yours. And I think just invite you to claim that, because I think we take for granted our gifts, right? Because they're just the lens we see the world through. And I really, truly believe that is one of your gifts. And so if you would like to like tuck a feather in your cap, that's just like, I am Anita, and my frequency is joy, I offer that to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I also think what a beautiful pairing with what Gina shared, because as we tend to some of the denser or more complicated emotions, and we create increasing permission for them, I do think that joy is what happens, right? We do step into this place of like, oh, like at this point, and I have a long history of shame. Like shame is my old friend. And at this point, when shame shows up, it's not that it feels great, but I call it my shame snakes. We're pals. I understand that it has medicine for me. And there is a kind of playfulness in it, even as it is obviously like there's discomfort there. And so I love this pairing of kind of breaking down in grief and joy of playing dress up with these different parts of ourselves, because I actually think those are the two sides of the same coin, right? And the more we give ourselves permission to sometimes crumble, the more we then have access to the kind of play and joy that Sunita is speaking to. So thank you for just perfectly clicking in both sides of that for us. Yeah. Anyone else want to speak to anything? No? Okay. So as I mentioned yesterday, we spent some time talking about, some of what people call shadow work, right? The tending to these more complex emotions, or the places where we have rejected ourselves. And what I want to talk about today is desire and intention and kind of playful construction, right? So if yesterday was looking at how we can deconstruct, today I want to look at how we can playfully construct. Because as I just said, so really it's like I gave you guys each a cue card beforehand. Those are the two ways that I think we build a business that's rooted in self-love, that financially nourishes us and also emotionally nourishes us. And the reason I'm so passionate about this work is two big reasons. One is that I think it's the only way things work, right? I think that if you are any way experiencing a spinning of wheels, it is often because we have learned these self-rejection business practices, right? And I think we want end results from our businesses, right? We want clients or wealth or, a lighter schedule, right? There are material things that we are wanting from our business. And I think we really want to love the process of owning our business and running our business, right? That's part of why I suspect, driven to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I think there's many reasons that make up the person who wants to be an entrepreneur, right? I think we are all freedom seekers. I think we are all visionaries who believe in the possibility of a bigger, brighter, different world. And I think we want to love our day-to-day, right? Those of you who perhaps left a corporate job or in the process of leaving a corporate job, I suspect part of it was, oh my God, I'm dying here, right? I have to put on this mask, or I have to work these hours that I don't want to work, right? I know from me, and I see in clients all the time, we are driven to be madly in love with our lives. And then we're given business practice techniques that don't feel nourishing, right? So we're trying to build a life that we love with tools that kind of feel like slime, right? Anyone relate to that? So one of the reasons that I love this kind of self-love business strategy is because it works. And the other reason is because I think I really want to invite us to think about how we can give ourselves not just end results, but active daily practice of living a business that we love and that we love to show up for, and that feels like it can take care of us as much as we can take care of it, right? Which doesn't mean you don't have days where you're overwhelmed or you're tired or you're burnt out or you're cranky, right? Like all of the human emotions get to show up in our business. But when we can build a foundation that's rooted in strategy and emotional practices of care, then I think we get to live the life we are hungry for, which is not actually dependent on some end result. And then the other thing I will say is that you hear stories all the time, and perhaps have experienced yourself, when we build from this self-sacrifice or self-rejection model, we might get somewhere to the end results, and then we might just be completely burnt out. There's this really beautiful writer. Her name is Emily McDowell. If anyone wants, I can send you a link to her stuff. She knows, she's actually famous for making these really gorgeous, fun, honest greeting cards, right? That are a little more pervasive now, but she actually created that trend where they say things like, yeah, sometimes life is really fucking hard, or whatever the case may be, right? Anyway, she's brilliant. And she has been writing really honestly for a while now about her business having this explosive growth. I mean, all right on Good Morning America, doubling and tripling her revenue month after month. And that inside she was just like a wreck. Her body was breaking down. She was having panic attacks, right? And she also kept feeling like, but isn't this what I'm supposed to want, right? I'm supposed to like this. And so she's a really beautiful writer. She's just a beautiful writer in general. Her name's Emily McDowell. But I think we see versions of that all the time, where when we are trying to build from self-sacrifice or self-rejection, one of two things often happens, and sometimes maybe a combination. One is that we get to the destination and it feels like shit, right? And we're exhausted or we're burnt out. And in some ways, we have to have some kind of tower card moment where we have to start breaking things down because we have built something that is unsustainable. We have built something that is rooted in self-sacrifice. And maybe we intellectually choose to burn it down, or maybe our body chooses for us to have it break down, right? Or maybe some outside influence comes crashing in like a wrecking ball. Or maybe we grip on with our tight fists and also continue to be exhausted and drained and overworked. Or we experience that churning wheels feeling, right? We continue to experience some version of, this is stalling. Why isn't it working yet? And a number of you kind of spoke to a version of that yesterday. So if you can relate to that, if you can relate to the experience of things are moving, but also way too friggin' slow, and like, why isn't it working yet? We often are very critical of each other, right? Of ourselves. Show of hands, right? You have this dream, it's a big vision, it's not going as fast as you want or as smoothly as you want, and your inner critic shows up to say, like, you dummy, right? And we didn't talk yesterday about the inner critic, but they are a loud voice on everyone's board of directors, I am willing to bet, right? So if you're doing that exercise, you might want to spend some time looking at, what role your inner critic has. But if you are in that place where things are moving, but they are moving slower or bumpier than you would like, and perhaps you are judging and critiquing yourself, but there's actually potentially a really big part of you who's taking really tremendous care of you. Meaning, there might be a part of you who's showing up and putting their foot on the brake because they're protecting you from building something that would cause too much sacrifice, right? So I'll speak to an example in my own business. There was a period where right after I lost my full-time sales director job in COVID, I almost immediately launched a group program, had like 12 people sign up, had 10 one-on-one clients, it went from as soon as I was full-time, I just had like full schedule. It was working. And of course I then was like, great, it will work forever. There'll never be a problem. La-di-da, here we go. And what I had created for myself was basically replicating this kind of exhausting corporate career and then of overgiving and poor boundaries. And then I just recreated it in my own business, right? And as I started to evolve out of that, I went through this period where one-on-one work was just not showing up, or maybe like one person would be working with me, right? And there was a part of me for a while that was frustrated by that. My group programs were failing, but one-on-one was just like, no. And even my group programs were kind of quiet. Anyway, the more I did this inner work, what I saw was that Kylie, the people pleaser, had too much share in the business. And so this protective self-love was showing up to say, we cannot let one-on-one clients in because your boundaries are shit. And you will give too much to them and be exhausted and constantly anxious that it's not enough, and perpetually in this state of reinforcing not enough. And so the slowdown in my business was actually a tremendous act of care that was inviting me to kind of reorder my relationship to boundaries and people pleasing and permission to take care of my own needs, which informs a tremendous amount of the work that I do. So it was a gift in that it allowed me to birth a deeper iteration of my work. And it was a part of me that was protecting the life that I actually want, which is joy with my kids and time to go for a walk and clients that aren't where we're not creating a codependent relationship, right? So what I want to offer to you is, if you are in this place of kind of where your business is not flowing in the speed or the ease that you would like, potentially, basically what we want to look at when this is happening is where self-rejection is showing up, and at the same time, where a really beautiful self-love might be showing up, a really protective, generous part of you might be showing up to say, if you had that right now, it would not take care of your heart. Because when we can ask those kinds of questions, we get to start to see more clearly and then build more intentionally. Does that make sense? Do we have any, and I want to read Rachel shared some beautiful things in the comments, but do we have any questions or thoughts on that so far? Okay, Rachel says, I come from higher ed teaching and I wanted it to work so bad, but it was so, oh yes. I mean, I almost became a professor. I went to grad school. I have a lot of teachers in my family. That is for sure an industry of extraction and overgiving. But it was so draining and continues to be that I cannot authentically show up and sustain what the job and entity requires of me. We see this a lot also in, I think, okay, I'm going to soapbox a little bit. I think this is a thing that happens in capitalism when there are jobs that are rooted, that are passion-driven jobs and that are care-driven jobs, right? Because the system of capitalism exploits that we are passion-driven or care-driven. And so teaching, arts, therapy become these really kind of extractive environments where our well-intentions are kind of manipulated against us by systems, right? Not necessarily, I mean, you might have individual like bosses reinforcing it, but it's the system itself is built to be extractive, which is again why I find this kind of deep inner work so important as we step into creating our own, because this is the model we're getting from everywhere, right? Is like sacrifice, and care is sacrifice. And so Rachel says, it was a heartbreaking identity that I had to grieve, but I know in my bones, this new small business path is where I am meant to be. Yes. Also, I want to like really, really relish what you just said, Rachel, about knowing in your bones. And I actually want to invite anyone who's on this call, or if you're on the replay, to take a moment to tap into what you know in your bones. In the deep parts of yourself, what is the truth that bubbles up about you in this world and the impact you're here to create and the life that you have built and are building? That's the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship, is that you carry vision and you can feel something in your bones that's leading you forward. And you're brave enough to listen. And I think that's pretty remarkable. And I really would invite you to relish and celebrate that part of yourself that has a truth in their bones and that has built enough of a channel to be able to hear that truth rise up and to honor it, even as, of course, it's complicated, right? And sometimes you might hear it and listen to it, but it's easier than others. If anyone wants to share what bubbled up for them, please feel free to. And if I invite these quick drop-ins and nothing shows up in terms of language, that's great too. Whatever you experience is perfect. Yeah, go ahead, Jean. Jean, I cannot wait. Sorry, I'm just going to say one thing, Jean. I cannot wait until the moment where we've cracked open or cracked away the part of you who thinks she has to apologize for sharing. One day we won't need that protector, and I relish that for all of us.
Well, thank you. I look forward to that too. I want to share with the group something that my therapist said to me that I had to like find room for, because at first it sounded super grandiose, and then I was like, no, she means it. And I was describing, because I had last year had been on the heels of a super toxic corporate engagement, and it was just like, it reminded me of everything I've been trying to get away from for years, and it was awful. And she said to me, you know, the shaman doesn't eat with the tribe. Like, what? Jesus, they live elsewhere. And when the tribe is not well, they come in, they help them sing it out, they dance it out, and then they leave. Right. And it was the identification piece, right? And I don't know, I mean, Shannon, that's a big word, but it's the model of it that I really liked. And so that was a big piece for me. The other piece was recognizing, and I think some of this is from prior work in the Business Incubator, is that the path of the entrepreneur, again, is fraught with what we talked about yesterday, that like hustle culture thing, and that the notion that there is a, whatever, I would call it a middle road, right? It's a middle road. Like you're not going from one, it's not the pendulum going from one side to the other. And because I have an inner critic that thinks I'm entrepreneuring wrong, even though it doesn't know anything about anything, but it's really good at punching holes in my entrepreneurship. But it is in that, I know that it is possible, and I hold on to that, both the role, like, yes, I belong outside where I am, going in, and I'm allowed to do this in my way. But that's a really tough, both of those things are very hard to hold on to. And I think, like everything else, you hold on to, like, that is constant integration.
Oh, Jean, I just love everything that you said. Oh, hold on, let's let Elizabeth in. I love everything you just said. Elizabeth, welcome. Jean was just sharing some juicy things about inner criticism, among other things. And yes, to the middle road. That's, again, great cue for where I wanted to go next. And this idea of being allowed to do it my way. I think that is one of the things that is tricky about entrepreneurship, right? You set off to do it your way. And also a couple of things. One is you're trying to do something you don't know how, perhaps you don't know how to do, right? Like one of the reasons why I told that story of like, I left my job and then immediately had a full group program was because I was in sales for 12 years, right? I had fallen on my face in trying to sell things 8 million times. I had figured out my own way of selling. And so then I was creating something new, but I had this really robust and deep skill set around how to sell in a way that feels ethical, that feels fun, that feels nourishing, right? So it was easy for me to just hop over, relatively easy, right, for me to hop over into a new place. Now, I had brought that overwork commitment and I had to unpack that. But a lot of people, like if you've never been in sales or marketing before and you're trying to build an online business and it feels tricky to learn sales and marketing, it's because it's new, right? Like how many times does the baby fall over when it's trying to walk? And we don't tell the baby like, dummy, haven't figured it out yet, right? So this actually came up yesterday, and I've seen this a number of times with clients, that especially when you are kind of high, when you have a high expectation for yourself, which if you are here, if you are my person, you have high expectations for yourself, you have a loud inner critic, and you have big dreams, like welcome. I just know that about you or you wouldn't be here. And one of the things that we can create with that is that we give ourselves really constrained space for the learning, right? Like, how do you learn things if you don't go out and learn them, right? If you don't take messy action, if you don't, read books or learn from coaches or fumble forward, right? So just naming that is a pattern that a lot of us can fall into. And one of my clients said it really beautifully. She said, basically I get an idea, and then if I don't immediately know how to do it and execute it perfectly, like I got a 5-minute window. And if I haven't figured it out in 5 minutes, then I start to tell myself, well, you'll never figure it out. Like you're not cut out for this, right? Anyone can relate to that. So again, the power of noticing what's happening in and of itself is hugely transformational, right? So if that pattern I just spoke to shows up for you, next time it happens, just pause and name it, right? I'm a big fan of saying like, oh, like, hi, inner critic, or, whatever. I got a whole cast of characters, right? And I just name them because it gives that witnessing gives us a pause so that we are less reactive to our own kind of protective self-rejection tendencies, right? The other thing I want to speak to, and then I want to pivot a little bit to actually talking about strategy, is, Jean said that her inner critic is convinced that she is entrepreneuring wrong. Anyone relate to an inner critic who's convinced that you're entrepreneuring wrong? I have a news flash for you about your inner critic. Everything you do is wrong to your inner critic. Its job is literally to tell you that every single solitary thing that you do is wrong, right? That is the job of the inner critic. The inner critic pretends they put on a good show that somehow they have an answer. They are only designed, this part of you is only designed to tell you that every single thing that you do is wrong. So when you recognize that, and when you actually give yourself permission to see that your inner critic is, first of all, they're just doing their job. It is self-preservation. We could go down a rabbit hole, but I have other places I want to go. We could go down a rabbit hole to meet with her or them or him, and do some integration work. But what I really want to invite you to recognize is that their job is to tell you that you're wrong, right? Like, my husband's job is to manage IT infrastructure. My job is to help exquisite entrepreneurs build things that they love and that take care of them. Your inner critic's job is to tell you that you're wrong. She's got one job. She does it probably pretty well. And also, she does not have solutions. There are no answers. There is only criticism. And so when we listen to it too loudly, when we let it be in charge, right? You've all had the experience of like using left and your inner critic's like dumb, wrong. Using right, your inner critic's like that was also wrong, right? Because the protection is just trying to say, it's like that hyper alert part of you that thinks, okay, I'll just constantly find the problem and then we can protect ourselves from it, right? In other words, it's not a voice that can constructively build. It is a voice that can only tear down. And so as we begin to see that, we also give ourselves permission to engage with it less as a voice of truth. It's not going to go away, especially if it's really loud, right? If you have like a long relationship with it, but it doesn't need to be in the driver's seat. And one of the ways that we can pivot, in the beginning, Elizabeth, earlier, Elizabeth, just for context, we had dropped into kind of listen to the wisdom of the truth that we know in our bones, right? And what I would love for you is essentially to be able to switch out the voice that feels most accessible so that the inner critic kind of sits in the background. We can watch with a little bit of objective distance, and that truth that lives in our bones gets to rise up and be more of the driving constructive force, because that wisdom that lives in your bones, that knowing that hums in your heart, like those are the things that constructively build in the world. And so what we want to do, if we go back to this model of board of directors, is that we want the people in charge, the parts of us in charge, to be the ones who are capable of building. And our inner critic, she's shit at building. It's not her job, right? She wants to take it. Thoughts, questions, ahas, frustrations? Shivite, I saw this. Was this hand gesture? I have something to say.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to be the game here is getting yourself a little space to be able to name it, to be able to engage without when you said, I don't remember what you said now, but you said it's just not identifying so much 120% with this part or that part, because there's a being in you anyway, in a different vernacular. Spirit, soul are different things. And I mean, in a lot of teachings, whatever, this is just IMHO, my humble understanding of things, is that your spirit is perfect. You're just a piece of it. That's great. You're connected to everything. Fantastic. But you came in and your soul got all these experiences, and now we're struggling with these bits and pieces, that are feeling powerless, and they're feeling powerless, and that, you know, strategies had to happen to help us move through that. So when we're talking about things like, you know, how do our board members show up? You know, there's some basic archetypes, but you know, it's just so formed by the culture we're in, what, and in family and all these kinds of things, that it's just about, can you get the distance to say, hey, inner critic, I see you and you're making me really feel shitty right now and I don't like it. Or the inner child who's just like, I can't do any of this and I just need to go hide, or whatever. You know, finding the adult in the room that is the mature, guiding, loving, compassionate, strong adult at the board table, who's getting that creative person over here and the person who likes systems over here. So this is just reminding me so much of the work I've been doing for a while, is that it is about strengthening your witness so you can sit in love and compassion with yourself, so you can talk to these bits and pieces that are hurting because they work so hard to keep you safe.
Yes. Okay.
And that's in your life and your business and all of it.
And everything you just said,
Soapbox.
everything you said, I love.
Done.
And
Sorry.
obviously we are simpatico. You said sort of in your life and your business, the other thing that I really love about this work, the reason I am so jazzed about it, is to go back to what I was saying earlier. You are driven to be an entrepreneur because you want a life that you love. And this work will build you a business that you love, and it changes the whole way that you relate to other dynamics, right? Like my relationship to friendship is profoundly different because of this work, right? Because of, in many ways, my business has been the teacher that's like, hey, what if you stopped asking yourself to be perfect in friendship? And I learned that in many ways, I learned that in friendship, because friendship, because business would show me where the like tender places were, or where the like dissonance was. And as I have integrated these parts, all of a sudden other things unrelated to business also start to feel easier. And so that's the other reason why I'm jazzed about this, is because it's actually like whole life work. Like a kind of trick, it's a kind of joke sometimes. Like the trick is, people come to me because they want help with their business. I'm like, great, we're actually gonna make your whole life better, right? The other thing I loved about what you said, Shaivite, is space. And earlier, Jean spoke to the middle path. And I think they are the same thing. How do we get onto the middle path? It's by creating that space, because these wounded, tender parts of ourselves, these rejected parts, they are, without the witnessing and the compassion and the curiosity, we are living in reaction to them, right? So that's when we do things without even kind of like fully realizing that they're happening. And as we create this practice of witnessing, of integration, et cetera, then we start to create more space. And in that space, we get to make more sovereign choices, right? So that the inner critic might still show up, but we, because there's that like breath of space between, get to stand in sovereignty and decide how we interact with the inner critic, right? It's not, oh, go away, I hate you, go back in the closet, but that she's there, or they're there, and then you get to pause a breath and then decide. And truthfully, because you're human, sometimes what you're going to decide is to listen to your inner critic and beat yourself up for a day. That's okay, because all of this is a practice. So then you come back to center, and just like a meditation practice, you come back to center and recreate that space of witnessing. And maybe next time you choose a different path, right? But it's all about creating that space, because also the more you create that space, the more frequently you build that muscle memory, the easier and easier and easier it is for you to say, oh yeah, I see you, inner critic, you're just doing your thing, we're great, right? And it just dissolves. And the other thing that I also find is that what also happens over time is enough of that integrating is that it just also gets fainter. It kind of turns into a ghost, right? It gets fainter and fainter and fainter, right? My people-pleasing self is much more of a ghost than she was, just like it. She was the mask, right? And now I had a really good conversation actually with Eva, who was on the call the other day, in which she pointed out to me, you're not actually a people pleaser anymore. you know, the break, the aha was you're beating yourself up for not being a people pleaser, but you're not actually a people pleaser anymore, right? So the other thing about this work is that that these parts begin to they fade because we're integrating what they need. Does that make sense? Okay.
Absolutely. I love that you said integrating what they need. And like from yesterday, it is about allowing those spaces that are painful to speak to what they're asking for. And that's really fucking hard to do when you're in it.
The other thing too, which we haven't spoken to explicitly, but you know, a lot of what we've been talking about so far is kind of about the way we can build some inner compassion and we can create for ourselves essentially the ability to breathe more easily in our business, right? Which is its own kind of freedom, right? To just not be miserable and beating yourself up. But the other thing is, from an energetic perspective, over and over and over again, these are the things that actually create the space. And just to share an example from my own life. So earlier this week, on Monday, actually, just before this work, not Monday, Wednesday, on Wednesday. So just before, day before the workshop, is when I had this conversation with Eva. So let's just share transparently, right? I had some kind of stuff bubbling in my life that I brought to my dear friend. I was unpacking it with her. That's when she shared, you're not a people pleaser, you're just beating yourself up for it. And she helped me unravel it. She helped me unravel it even more than I had been. And a lot of it actually had to do with an anxiety about being seen, right? That's kind of what the protection that was showing up for me in that instance was kind of not letting people see me, because if I'm not a people pleaser, I'm being my authentic self, which means if you reject me, you're rejecting me. You're not rejecting a mask, right? And so there was this anxiety that I was watching play out in some interpersonal relationships about, you know, saying no to something and feeling bad about it, or being myself and feeling bad about it. Anyway, without going too far down a rabbit hole, you know, we unpacked. It was pretty profound, as it often is with Eva. And the next day, I had a video go viral on TikTok. The next day, right? Like, I don't know, 70,000 people have watched the video now. I've had a whole bunch of new followers. Some of you watching this might be from that, right? Because I created for my deepest subconscious, a layer deeper of safety and being seen. And so those deep parts of myself actually weren't in resistance to being seen. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, we can let everybody come in, right? So depending on your relationship to kind of the metaphysical, you can take that or leave that. It's not actually required for this practice to change things for you, but it is what I experience again and again, is that this reorders my interior, which allows me to act differently, to show up differently, to say like newer, bolder things, and energetically, things just start shifting and reordering themselves. Pause for that. Thoughts, questions? Okay. So the place that I really wanted to go today, where are we doing on time? Okay, great. Is what I wanted to look at is actually some of the action piece, right? Oh, great, Michelle's here. Lovely. I want to look at some of the action piece, right? Because so much of our business is this combination of inner work, inner clarity, and then taking the action out there, right? Hello, Rochelle. Welcome, love. So I want to start. So one of the things that I want us to think about is how that truth that hums in your bones, the song that sings in your heart, the knowing that you have, actually not only can lead your creations in the world, but can lead your actions themselves. Meaning, a lot of us think about our content, meaning maybe the social media stuff that we share, or the journals that we create, or the coaching containers that we offer. We think of that as the thing that comes up and out of our heart, right? But then in order to build an infrastructure around it, we pull from the tools of hustle culture or toxic manifestation culture, right? We pull from these tools that give us like exact steps, follow these exact steps, and A plus B equals C, right? What I would like to offer to you is that your heart also knows how to build a strategy that will get you where you want to go. Now, you might need to learn some skill. You might need to learn, right? You might need to, learn from somebody how to lead a sales call that doesn't feel slimy, right? This isn't, I don't mean that there's no room to learn. Otherwise, my job would be kind of boring. But I want to offer that you have a desire. Your desire drives you. Your desire shows up around, your desire shows up, and it has a lot to show you about where you show up in social media, how you show up in social media, what you build, what infrastructure and strategy you create. But a lot of us have a tendency to reject those whispers because we think the kind of external framework we've been given is the one that will get us where we want to go. And so what I really want to talk about today, and what a lot of the Business Incubator is about, is as we do this deep kind of shadowy parts work, we also excavate access to, how do I want to build an infrastructure that supports me, a strategy that supports me, while also allowing the generative content of my heart to show up and thrive in that space. Does that make sense? And I think for a lot of people who are heart-centered, this is especially tricky. Like, I'm just show of hands. When you think of selling or strategy, what are the words that show up for you? We'll drop them in the chat box. Do you think of selling or you think about strategy? What either emotions or words show up for you? Elizabeth, eek, ugh. Yeah. Delegate, scammy. Oh yeah, Rochelle's like, just give it. I don't really want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Give it to somebody else. Scammy. Yeah. So, okay. If you're building this business, right, you have this gorgeous heart-centered thing that wants to live in the world, and you want to take care of yourself. You want to receive yuck corporate jargon. I'm charging you to educate. Okay. I like that, Kristen. I like choosing empowered language that gives us deeper access to things. If you are actively trying to build a business in which you put out an offer and people pay you for that offer, and you get to pay your bills by doing the magic you love in the world, and when you think of building a strategy or selling things, you just want to hide under the table because you feel like a sleazeball, that's a pretty tough cognitive dissonance, right? And you're going to have a hard time giving yourself permission to show up and tell people about your magic in the world, because you're obviously, the last thing you want to be is a slime ball, right? So what I want to look at a little bit today is how we can build a strategy that feels good when it comes to selling. So I just want to pause. Any thoughts, questions, ahas as I'm sharing that?
I've got a quick question, and maybe you'll answer this, but I'm wondering how to do this as like a person who has learned to function in the world by kind of organizing myself around helping other people, and neglecting myself, because I think that's the energy that I tap into whenever I try to create. Like, I enjoy sharing things with people because I want them to be happy and to feel better, and like, yeah.
Oh.
And be lifted up, and that's a noble desire, but obviously there's something deeper there, right, that I can tap into, around kind of the self-neglect, and how can I shift my energy from out there to me, because obviously it needs to be about other people, right, or else they're not going to resonate with it, but how do I make it about me first, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh my God, I'm like exploding with things I want to say. I love everything you just asked. Okay, so, and I also want to really, really, really celebrate you. Like, I have tears in my eyes that you're asking the question, how can I make it about me? Because coming from a place of genuinely motivated to help people, and also protective self motivated to help people, right? So that's what's tricky, right? Is that as you're speaking, like, you clearly have a heart desire to be a force for good in the world, and people pleasing and self-neglect is a coping mechanism, and they're layered on top of each other, kind of interwoven. And so I think if you resonate with what Elizabeth is sharing, I think kind of the first project, which is some of what we will walk through in the Business Incubator, is giving yourself permission to unhook the self-rejection part of that from the authentic part of that, right? Because your drive to be a force for good in the world is actually like a beautiful motivation, and it is clear. I can just kind of like, I can feel the energy of it. And also I think it's clear, because that's who's going to show up in this kind of a call, that you are genuinely motivated by that. And also it's enmeshed with this kind of self-neglect preservation, right? And so what we want to just start to do is give them permission to fall apart from each other. We don't even have to ask the self-neglect to go away. We can just ask for a moment that they like disentangle. I am a really, really, really big proponent of intention. I think intention shapes the entirety of our existence. That's why I started yesterday with you setting an intention. And I really, really believe that simply dropping into your heart center and setting the intention that these two can begin to exist parallel rather than enmeshed begins to start to make that. I mean, your question itself starts to create that, right? And in many ways we can then watch, like kind of watch the unfolding of those two things. So that's one thing. There's so much I want to say. I'm trying to choose. The other thing I actually want to speak to is essentially I want to offer the sales models that the way I see, there's 3 different sales models, and Jean has heard this before because I spoke about it at a previous workshop, but it's very much an answer to this question. So I'm gonna make a note of that. So I'm going to talk about kind of 3 different sales models that I see, 2 of which are harmful, and one of which is the middle path that Jean has spoken to. Jean, I don't think you were at that workshop. Anyway, I also want to acknowledge Kristen saying, I think I really struggle from what my self-worth is in a money form. 1,000%. Yes, money is wildly complicated energy, and then a lot of people pretend it's not complicated. Right? A lot of people tell you just budget better or work harder, and it is so nuanced, it is so complex. It does get to be divested from our self-worth, it does get to be easy, and also like permission for it to be complicated. I once had a therapist who said something so beautiful. I was kind of talking about parenting and balancing all the things in my life, and he was like, yeah, hard things are hard. And I was like, what a gorgeous permission, right? Like, what if I didn't put the pressure on myself? Like, unhooking your self-worth from money within capitalism is complicated. And yet that is the intention that you are setting. So what if you gave yourself some grace to say, hard things are hard, and I get to like keep following this thread, instead of, Jesus, you set this intention yesterday, why hasn't it changed already? Right? Okay. And I think where I trip up, especially, and also, Kristen, if you haven't already, I do have a resource. It's in my like Instagram bio. It's called Money is Your Love Story. It's a free, if you haven't done it yet, it's a lovely kind of introduction to some of the ways that I think that unhooking can happen. So you can peek that too. Elizabeth says, and I think where I trip up especially is needing to conserve my energy and not show up online to spend time on me, but I can't do that if I'm trying to run an online business. Yes. Okay. Earlier, when I was talking about my relationship to one-on-one clients and kind of hiding from them, it was exactly this, right? When our inner boundaries are porous, which happens when we are kind of in this codependent people-pleasing model, what happens is either we overgive or we hide. That's a very common response, right? It's like overgive. Oh no, I need to retreat because I don't know how to like navigate this with sovereignty. And so, so one of the things that I think is really important here for anyone who relates to this is really letting yourself go on this journey, which you're probably already on, but of kind of unhooking from where codependency is running your business, right? Where codependency is perhaps a pretty significant, has a lot of shares in the business, and where you might start to actually allow that to soften. But in particular, what I want to talk about is sales models, because a lot of the work so far, we were just talking about interiority, and I want to talk a little bit about strategy. So the way I see it is that there are 3 big primary sales models. One is the overpowered sales model. That is the one that all of you are thinking of, right? You're thinking of the kind of quote unquote used car salesman, like the guy from Matilda, who if you were a 90s kid and watched that movie, right? The guy from Matilda who just like manipulates people, doesn't take no for an answer, is very coercive. The overpowered sales model makes the client or potential client feel small and makes themselves a giant, right? So yeah, the dials back the speedometer, exactly. So that is the person who is manipulative, who doesn't take no for an answer, who is coercive, who makes you feel bad about yourself, right? So is like kind of weaponizing your own vulnerable parts against you to coerce a yes, right? Pressure tactics, manipulation. It's very, very pervasive. And it is the thing that people think of when they think of selling, right? It feels slimy. I'm sure you can all think of a moment where you experienced that and you felt gross, right? And one of the big reasons a lot of people are kind of like arms up about interacting with people who sell at all is sometimes because of that, right? But the problem is that you couldn't be that if you tried. Now, I will say, and we go into this quite a bit in the Business Incubator, but we haven't gotten there yet, but for those of you who are in it now, but I will say you might be using some of those manipulative tactics, even though they feel icky because they're the ones you've been given, right? So it's not uncommon that, always be closing is the thing that you were told, or, don't take no for an answer. And so you're trying to apply it because it's what you've been told. But it probably doesn't feel good and maybe doesn't work. And you're kind of like, you're like wearing this weird costume when you try it, right? So and then you feel like you need to take a shower afterwards, and then avoid selling altogether because your model is I either hide or I use this gross overpowered model, and I don't want that. So one of the things that I think is important is recognizing that you are in reaction to that often, but also in integrity, beginning to look at where you might be employing some of that so that you can strip it away. Because it's not going to work for you anyway, right? And then we swing to the other end of the spectrum. And I guarantee you, this is probably where most of you are. And this is kind of what Elizabeth was speaking to very beautifully. That is the underpowered sales model. So that is when you make yourself teeny tiny and you make your client or potential client a giant, right? And so in this model, you are trying so hard not to be the coercive person that you actually make yourself, you create a different kind of power imbalance. So ways that this might show up is never actually selling, right? Like having a business that you don't tell anybody about. Ways this might show up is also just that fear of like, I said it once, I can't say it again, right? Like I put the offer up there one time, that needs to be enough because if I do it any more, then I'm being pushy. Any anxiety about being pushy is often in this underpowered sales model. This can look like, so it can look like just like kind of saying it once. It can create that inconsistent dynamic that people have a lot of self-critique around because they're locked into this underpowered model, again, because they're afraid of the overpowered model. There's a lot that goes into the consistency self-critique, but that's one thing. The other thing that can happen in this model is someone jumps into your DMs and is like, hey, I'm interested in your work. And then you do the thing where you kind of like throw the kitchen sink at them and you just say like immediately start pitching or immediately start offering like, okay, here's the links, you can book, bye, and you run away, right? You don't actually kind of intimately engage in any way. You just kind of are saying, here's my 3 different offers, pick one, bye, right? And I'm saying it fast because I think that is often our energy of like, someone's interested, I'm scared, right? Kristen's nodding her head. A metaphor that I like to use for this is like if someone new moves into your neighborhood and you like show up with a plate of cookies, the overpowered person is that like nosy neighbor from Bewitched, right? Who's like uses the plate of cookies to pry their way into the door. But the underpowered sales model is like, you put the plate of cookies on the door and then you run and ring the doorbell and hide in the bushes, right? You're like, don't actually take credit. Don't let me anywhere near this. And also I hope that they like these cookies and then secretly become my friend, right? So there's a real, when we're in that model, we're in this tremendously disempowered relationship to our offers, to receiving money. I think there's a lot to think about in terms of power dynamics of care for our clients themselves, right? So it's not uncommon that people who hire coaches who have employed that overpowered sales model then have an experience where that overpowered character has cast themselves as some kind of guru, right? Like, you need me, you won't get there without me. So they get locked into a codependent model where where their coach is kind of like telling them they don't know any better, which is gross. And then the flip side is that if we are perhaps coaches or healers, and we're in the underpowered model, and then we're trying to invite someone to hire us, you're not actually making yourself safe, right? Because you're doing the inverse codependent, where you're the small figure, and they need to feel safe that they can hold us, that we can hold the boundaries of the container, right? And so not only is it ineffective sales, I actually think that it creates an emotionally unsafe container when your work is deep transformational work, right? Which I suspect a lot of you are here, birthing and doing. And so not only is it ineffective, I actually think it's out of integrity for best practices with our clients, right? That we're giving them too much power. And in that, what we're also doing is seeking their validation, right? What we're doing in that moment on a like subtle level is, if you pick me, then I get to be big, right? If you pick me, then I get to be proper size. And until then, I'm just itty bitty. And that's not actually a fair weight to cast onto our potential clients, right? And so just as much as the overpowered model is unethical in, I think, very obvious ways, I actually think this underpowered model is also unethical, and it's ineffective, right? So and Elizabeth is saying, I'm the doorbell ditching cookie neighbor. Great, own it. I love it. And also, again, recognize that if you're doing that, it's because you're trying to keep yourself safe, right? And so all of these practices are self-preservation, and also they're not required. And one of the reasons, I think, in addition to all of the deep subconscious work, one of the reasons that I think a lot of people end up choosing the underpowered sales model is also just simply that not a lot of people teach what I call the empowered sales model. There's not actually a tremendous, I do think there are a good number of people who employ it, right? But I don't think there are a lot of people who know how to teach it or teach it well. I'm not the only one. I'm not going to claim that, but I think it's hard to find that information, and you have to kind of sift through kind of a lot of junk, right? Jean is saying, I've often delegated my sense of self-worth. Yes, I guess. Oh, yes. And also, that's another one. Another way that this underpowered sales model will show up is just an immediate desire to delegate sales and marketing. Now, if you have a vision of a business that scales, if you have a vision of a bit, like, I make no bones of the fact that my interest is ultimately like a, $1 million business or something in that range. Not when my kids are tiny, but like, that's what I'm interested in, right? So at some point, there's big pieces of delegation that happen, but delegation that comes from a place of, I understand how to do this and I don't want to do it anymore, versus I am not capable, someone else take this off my plate, is very different energy, right? And so what we want is, even if ultimately you hire a copywriter to do some of your marketing, it's coming from this place of sovereignty and power and choice, instead of that kind of hiding, I'll never get what I want, I'm not very capable energy, right? And anyways, I say more about delegation, but I'll try to stay on this track about sales models. So what does the empowered sales model look like? I want to invite you, before I give my answer, I actually want to invite you to feel into it for a moment. As I've given you these two alternate models, and as Gina's given us this language of the middle path, right? My Buddhist selling. Drop in for a second. What might a middle path, an empowered sales model, look or feel like for you? Before I give you my own language. If you want to put it in the chat or even come off mute, you're more than welcome to, or you can just scribble in your journal and keep it private. Rachel says, being confident in your knowledge and also leading them there too. Yes, yes, yes. Elizabeth says, contained energy, confident, clear on boundaries and directions. Yes. I love how much confidence is immediately showing up, right? Here's my offer. I think it's badass. If you do too, hit me up. Yes, exactly. That kind of like what you're speaking to there, Rochelle, is like not needing to explain, right? That kind of over-explaining energy is often also in that underpowered sales model. I can be myself because I'm not for everybody and everybody isn't for me. Oh, the freedom of being yourself. Coming from a place of power and educating. Yes, yes, yes. Right. And what's beautiful, to my point earlier about your heart actually knows how to do this, immediately upon having these 3 models laid out, some part of you could drop in and tap this, right? Now, obviously, fully employing it might feel might still feel new and complex and vulnerable, to be totally transparent. And I just want to reinforce how what we're birthing, what we're rising up is the way you already know how to be in your business, right? We're clearing off the clutter, and then we're giving some context and some reframing for what you in your heart already know how to do, right? One of the things I love to share about sales, having done it for 12 years before working for myself, is I worked with a lot of different types of salespeople. At one point, I managed a team of 25. They were wildly different from one another, right? And when I was a sales director, one of my direct reports, this beautiful woman named Emma, was very quiet and reserved and incredibly diligent. And her customers loved her because they knew that she could handle all of these complex details. She could help them really intimately. She knew how to show up as this like genuinely helpful, interested person. She wasn't like, she was by her own definition a more shy, quiet person, right? She was a tremendous salesperson because she was authentic and she tapped into what she did well, right? Obviously, I'm a little bit more extroverted, and my sales style has always been like, I can't promise I'll remember to send you the follow-up, but we will have fun in the meantime, right? I'm kind of being silly, but like, to Jean's point, by being yourself, you have access to that confidence and you find your way of being successful, right? And so there is no one way to be a good salesperson. I think there are core tenets and framing, right? This empowered model works better, feels better, but it's not about a script that you must follow or a way that you must be, right? So one of the other really gorgeous and important pieces of an empowered sales model is curiosity, which is beautiful because that's also the way we're tending to our inner shit, right? Is we're bringing curiosity. So curiosity is kind of running the show in both places, because good sales, the best sales calls are the ones where you were talking as little as possible. Unlike this presentation where it's me talking, right? A good consult call, if you were to have a consult call, the client is actually the one who's doing all the talking. And we are showing up genuinely curious about who they are, what they need, where they want to go, and really confident about what we have to offer. And then we're just there to find out if it's a match, right? There's no proving, there's no over explaining, right? It's like, I know what I have to offer and I know it's great. Even if part of me scared, you, to this day, there's always a part of me that's like, oh, I would do well in this consult call. That doesn't have to go away, right? But you show up confident in the depth of your work. Part of that is, to Kristen's point, unhooking from the self-worth of money. Part of that is, to Elizabeth's point, unhooking from the codependence of validation, right? But you stand in the confidence of your work, and then you're curious as can be about who they are, what they want, where they want to go. You just ask a lot of questions. Now, here I'm just talking specifically about consult calls, right? There's lots of places and iterations of selling, but using that example, we're not trying to convince anyone. Convincing selling is terrible. So just think of the energetics. Convincing is pushing, right? Someone tries to convince you of their political opinion. Even if you agree with them, you want to get out of that conversation as fast as possible, right? But a lot of people think that they have to like pitch and convince to sell. Like good selling, there's no pitching involved, right? Like, just not to like toot my own horn, but how often have I pitched the Business Incubator? I haven't, right? But I am really confident that it will change your life and your business. And I'm mentioning it. And then we're just intimately engaging with what's going on for you and what wisdom I have to offer, right? And some of you will, I suspect, like come and chat with me and see if it's a good fit, right? And also, maybe none of you will. Some of you are already in the program. Maybe this round of this workshop, no one's actually going to sign up. And also, that's okay. I'll do another workshop, right? Because that's the other thing that's beautiful about building structures and strategies that work, is that you begin to have you begin to develop a trust in the strategy itself and the structure itself because it works for you. As you can probably tell, I freaking love these workshops. I think they are so fun to do. And even if you take 10 workshops and never sign up, never pay me a dime, I love that I get to be part of your journey. These are genuinely fun for me. So I make them a cornerstone of my selling strategy because I love them and I think they work. And I think they're a beautiful way to like live out my values of generosity without overextension, blah, 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 blah. And also I know the model works where some people will feel a resonance and some people will be interested in more. And it's just, and it gets to be kind of a rinse and repeat in a fun way. Every workshop is different. Every group of people is different. But I have built a thing that I trust and feel safe in. And that also then frees me up to show up with greater generosity, right? Does that kind of make sense? So empowered selling is that curiosity driven. It's the unhooking from pressure, from convincing, and then it's locking into and birthing a kind of system that feels good for you to show up in, that feels generous, that feels fun, that feels playful, as Sunita spoke to, and that plays to your strengths, right? And your genuine way of showing up. I once had a client who was like, I really hate writing. And I was like, great, stop writing then, right? Like, let's make some videos. So pause for questions, thoughts, insights, frustrations. Jean says, unhooking from the terror of living alone in the refrigerator box with only my shame for company is hard, whereas I am genuinely interested in people always. Exactly, right? Like, Jean, you love relationships. You love connecting with people. It's like immediately apparent. And so if selling gets to shift for you to like a genuine, like a connection, like where this is connection, and not in the energy, and it might start this way, we'll get there, but not in the connection of like, this is connection, I promise, I won't try to sell you anything ever, don't actually try to hire me, right? But like genuinely, oh, like I have a consult call on Monday with a woman and I'm super, super jazzed to like find out her story, right? Like, what is she interested in? Where is she going? What kind of magic do we potentially get to create together? Because again, at this point, and it's a constant journey, but there's enough confidence in the bigness of my work, and there's confidence in the systems that I have built, that I get to show up to each selling interaction without the weight of the world on it, right? Like, if this one post doesn't get me a client, I'm screwed and it will never work, right? We have all been there. We have all been there. I have moments, right? Because it's a practice. But the gift of empowered selling and building a nurturing sales framework, nurturing for you, is that you also can like unhook from the worry, right? Because you're like, no, I have built something that works, right? And now we're just going to iterate, we're going to tweak, we're going to improve, but we get to play in it. Okay, I'm going to pause. I feel like I have been talking a lot. So what's coming up for everybody? How are we doing on time? Oh, we've got 15 minutes left. Hot damn. Yeah, go ahead, Shavite.
So one of the things I loved about what you just spoke to, what came to me were two things. One thing is fun. You know, you said playful. And the idea of just being in the moment and being fully present means there is no space for the pressure to touch you because you're in the moment and you're being focused. and present. And I don't mean focused like, ooh, I'm focusing. No, I just mean because you're present. You're 100% present. And the fear, there's no room for that there. And then the other thing that came to me was some really great advice, which I probably shared with you, I think, but fun and curiosity rooted in power. So, you know, uh, it's an experiment. It's not, you can keep experimenting. And that's a way that if I really focus and shift my kind of really like walk through my fear and those bits and pieces of me that are like, I'm terrified of doing this. It's like, okay, well, what if we just do this for fun and curiosity
Mm.
and leave the pressure of needing to make all the money and what the next 10, 15 years are going to look like financially and how I'm going to put my creativity into the world in a way I have never done before. What if we do that with fun and curiosity and be in that space with it? And that I have to walk through the fear to be sitting with that. And then the third thing that just popped in my head is my beloved guru used to say, fear and excitement are the same sides of the coin. If you can shift your fear into excitement, then you're going to open up something. And it does take some work to do it, and sometimes it's hard, but those are the things that came to me. But mostly it's like fun, playfulness, fun, being present with who you're speaking with in the moment, especially if you're going to be someone who's doing those types of if you're doing consulting like that, or coaching like that.
Yeah.
That's what came to mind
Yes.
for me to remember too.
I love, right? How do we pick a way to show up in our business that feels fun? Not so that fun is the reward for good behavior, but it's the thing that we're building into the foundation and the bedrock. I'm going to give a super silly example from my own business, but I love a good meme, right? Which like people now know because I get them in my DMs all the time, which is like, feel seen. But like I love a good meme. And there was this like aha that I had about fun in my own business. Because that is very much an edge for me. I take things too seriously, and I'm kind of constantly getting needled about like, let it be a little more fun, Caldwell, right? I'm a goofball, but I take things seriously, right? And I share these things also, like I share because I really want to point out that this gets to be a practice and we get to be taken care of right? Like I haven't nailed how to have fun in my business. I haven't nailed how to like, I have a lot of fun, but I haven't nailed how to like, let it be fun all the time and like give myself pressure off. Right. Because I say that because we can, to the point Elizabeth just shared, we can create so much shame because we think everyone else has it figured out and I am wrong and I will never get there. And so as someone who teaches this for a living, who I will say with tremendous confidence is really fucking good at what she does, I am very much still learning these things, right? So you also get to very much still learn the things that you are birthing, right? Jean saying, I'm a goofball, I take things seriously. Yes, exactly. Because the other thing that you're pointing to, Elizabeth, in that beautiful share, is we create this dynamic where we have to have everything figured out before we can be taken care of, right? So this is one of the traps of kind of personal development when it's enmeshed with business, is that we create for ourselves a story that when I have solved all my gremlins, when I have healed 100%, then I can have the business that I want. Now, do you think that Jeff Bezos is an emotionally enlightened human being? No, right? Like, it is not required to be an emotionally enlightened, whole self person to create the wealth that you want to create in the world. And also, when you're on this kind of a path, which you're here, so you are, the two do end up kind of connected to each other. Rachel's cracking up. But often we carry the story that like, I can't have what I need. I don't get my needs met until I figured all this out. But there is no figuring it all out, right? Like our businesses are constant places of iteration, right? This is another thing that I think is a really beautiful thing to like kind of remind yourself. There is no business that's perfect, right? Every time you kind of figure something out, there'll be a new thing. I'm actually going to use a parenting example. So I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and my husband and I are always laughing because as soon as you think you figured out like what your kid needs, you're in a new phase and they need something else, right? Your business is the same thing, right? It's constantly evolving. And I could actually go through a whole metaphor about how like there's a period where your business is like this baby that you can't take your eyes off. And then all of a sudden one day you realize like your business is okay. You can like go to the bathroom by yourself, right? So, but the point that I want to make is, you know, to Elizabeth's really gorgeous share that there's like some shame that can come up. That's like, well, I haven't figured it out, and therefore I can't figure it out and won't figure it out. I would also at the same time offer the figuring it out is actually an infinite project, right? Because you are constantly evolving. Your business will continue to evolve. There'll always be some new thing that you're learning, or some new social media app, or the algorithm will change, or your offer will evolve, or your lifestyle, you'll want a lifestyle change, or you'll learn like a deeper iteration of who you are, and things will keep evolving. And there can actually be real joy and play in that when we unhook it from the shame of perfectionism. And when we get to weave deeply the belief that I get taken care of in the mess. This is really, really important. I get taken care of in the mess. As I figure it out, my needs are met. Because when you're a perfectionist, you have a story that you cannot have what you need until you're perfect. And in business, this often creates for ourselves a cycle that we are under-resourced because we haven't, quote unquote, figured it out. But that's an impossible task, right? So we're walking around with one of those tricky subconscious logics that my needs will not be met until I have it perfect. And perfect is an impossible thing. Therefore, my needs are never actually met. And so the more that we can weave in the deep belief that we are allowed messy action, and that messy action actually is the only action that exists. It's also the more magnetic action, but we'll get into that in the incubator. Then you also get to rewire in your subconscious that it's safe to receive payment while you are still, quote unquote, a mess. Because for a lot of us, we actually also kind of buffer on allowing ourselves to receive clients or money because we think, but I haven't figured it out yet, right? I haven't earned it yet, or I'm too messy, or right. So I really want to offer that there's really potent medicine in Shavite says Shavite's feeling big magic from that. That's what I do. Secretly, everything's an activation. So drink a lot of water after this. Yeah, I just like really want to weave for you the possibility that you get taken care of when you're messy, and that you get to have your needs met. You get to be resourced as you are figuring it out. Yeah, I'm going to pause there. Let's see. Thoughts, questions, ahas. Jean, you had your hand up. Were you going to say something, or were you just stretching your hand?
All I was going to say is that there is a part of me that feels this really deep sense of relief at the idea. Because if it's safe for me to receive, if I am fine right now, right? And there's some part of me that actually hears that. And like, I'm actually feeling it. Whereas I would argue that the refrigerator box out on the sidewalk isn't, I don't know if it's feeling the same way. It's like there's a somatic level of like just kind of relief and exhale for however long it lasts, right? And to Shavite's point, like the fear and excitement piece. But this is different because it is like, what if I can let my shoulders down?
Okay, well, first of all, I freaking love that. Thanks for being the walking evidence that we've just magicked for 2 days and already things are exactly, but that's exactly what gets to happen, right? Is that like in some ways all of a sudden, and on some ways kind of gradually over time, these things soften and shift and evolve, and all of a sudden something new is possible, right? You are no longer, or you begin to be no longer in reaction to this existential dread that you'll be abandoned and alone and destitute. And then possibility shows up. Then you can take the messy action, because if the consequence of mess is abandonment, if the consequence of a mistake is that you are alone and exiled from your community, guess what? You're not going to take action, because you are not going to risk isolation and abandonment, right? But as we reweave these deep inner parts, all of a sudden we get to take messy action, because it starts to show up as just that, messy action, right? Instead of like it's no longer hooked into the anxious consequence of our deeper shit, right? And then that's when like the real creative genius shows up. That's when the really dynamic messaging shows up. That's when we get to take our clients much deeper, right? That's the other thing. As I have unhooked from perfectionism, I'm a much better coach, because I'm not afraid to ask a question that might be uncomfortable for a client, right? Like I'm more in integrity because I can poke and I can risk them being mad at me, right? Because because that's clear to me where like the deeper work will go, right? So we enjoy our business more, our business feels safer, we receive more material care from our business, and our magic is better, right? We create bigger, better things. There's a woman I might send this out as a link. There's a woman I also follow on TikTok and Instagram who I really love, who I forget what her work is called. She's an artist, and she just talks a lot about making bad art and how like revolutionary it is. Like, right, how she basically says like, how did I become a full-time artist? I gave myself radical permission to make terrible, junky art, right? And so Simone Gray Soul is one of the only business coaches that I actually follow, and she talks a lot about the garbage post challenge, right? Which is like, give yourself permission to write terrible posts 30 days in a row and watch what happens, right? And so there is something really profound that starts to happen when we give ourselves permission to just like fuck up, essentially. Rachel saying, I love bad art. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, because I'm mindful. Oh my gosh. Okay, give me one more minute of your time. I will not go over more than a minute. So what I want to offer is, I will send out the replay for this. If this is resonating with you, I would freaking love to have you in the Business Incubator. This is what we do. It's a 6-month container. There's strategy. There's these kind of calls. There's group support. There's brilliant people in here like Jean and Shayna. It's a really, really, really profound container. It is so much freaking fun. So if you want a business that feels good, that makes you money, that feels safe to the deeper parts of you, that just fucking works already, come and talk to me. I'm going to drop the link here in the chat. I'll send it out in the follow-up. The good news for you, in the spirit of messy action, is that before our call, I forgot to update the website with the new price and the current dates, which means I'm going to honor my mistake. So the course of the program is actually $700 more now than it is on the website, but I'm honoring the mistake. So for y'all here, the course of the program is $700 less. And so if you want to join, it's a great reason to join now. And if you want to chat, you can book a consult call right on the website, or you can shoot me a message and we'll set up a time to chat. As you can gather from the way I talk about sales, I am not interested in convincing people, right? So if you do want to chat, that consult call will in no way, shape, or form be a thing where you are pressured. And in fact, I will tell people like, don't join yet, right? I'm not interested in extraction-based selling, right? So if for no other reason, you could just come curiously experience what it's like and take some tips for yourself. But it's really fun. It's really magical. And I would just love, love, love to have you all in particular. This has been a really, really vibrant, nourishing experience for me because of what you have brought. Even those of you who haven't said a word, you have brought really big magic, and we are making it together. which is very much why I love doing this work, because together we create really big things. So yeah, if you want to chat, shoot me a message, book a consult call, and I'll miss you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Any thoughts or questions or final words that you'd like to say to feel complete? Thank you, thank you, thank you. This was wonderful. Have the best weekend. And I'll talk to you soon.